Well, welcome to the Holistic Productivity webinar, and thank you very much for joining in, whether you're joining live today or you might be watching a recording of this webinar. And if you don't already have this PDF document, you can go ahead and download it. This will cover most of the information that I'm going to be talking about during the webinar today. You can get it over at technicallysimple.com/HPW for Holistic Productivity Workbook. So technicallysimple.com/HPW. And so this will cover the kind of key points I'll be making today. And there's also some places where you can fill in some information as we go through the various exercises. And if you don't have this and it's not convenient to get it right now, that's totally fine. You can just open up a text editor, grab a piece of paper to write on or something like that. And that'll certainly do just as well as we go through. Okay, so to give this all some context, I just wanted to share my story and what led me to developing holistic productivity and doing the other work that I do. And I'll go back to 1990. I just graduated with a degree in electrical engineering with a computer systems focus, and I set out into the workforce and worked in the software as a software engineer for a number of years. Some of them spent at Corel back in the heyday of CorelDRAW, if you remember that from the 90s. And I soon discovered that I really liked to kind of organize and manage teams. So I became a development manager and project manager. And at one point I was managing teams involving about 250 people in various departments, from legal to development to QA and documentation. So definitely have been in the thick of things in the corporate world, and wasn't always easy, but I certainly am very grateful for the learning experience. And life could get kind of stressful in those days, so I developed an interest in yoga, and I liked it so much. In 1999, I started to teach yoga classes regularly, and I continue to do that to this day. And even had some of my colleagues from the high tech showing up in my classes, and that's been a big part of my life, and it certainly influences the work that I do today. And then in 2003, I decided it was time to venture off on my own. I'd certainly learned a lot from my corporate experience, and wasn't always working on the types of things that I really wanted to be working on. And so I said, okay, now's the time to go off and do my own thing. And I'd always been fascinated with technology. I've grown up with all of this amazing technology as it's evolved, and I've always seen the potential for creativity and communication and expansion, all these things. But I also saw technology was becoming a source of stress for many people. So in my own way, one of the core missions with Technically Simple was to, and still is, to give people a way of using technology effectively, developing some awareness around habits they're developing around technology, right down to the kind of the nuts and bolts of the specific applications that they're using. I found that a lot of my work with Technically Simple involved doing some coaching. So people maybe had these amazing tools, but they weren't sure where they were going with their life or their business. And they might get very good at the tools, but at the end of the day, maybe they were just getting more efficient at going around in circles. So the key question in coaching is, what do you want? Where do you want to go? Things like that. What do you want to create with your life? And so I naturally had these conversations with people, and I like this part of my job so much. I became a professionally trained coach with CTI, which is Coaches Training Institute, one of the biggest training institutes in the world. And again, the coaching really plays a big role in the work that I do today. And then back in 2008, this is where things changed overnight. And I had a very active business at the time. I was working with some really interesting, diverse group of clients as a coach and a consultant. And I was very unexpectedly diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer, and my landscape changed completely. I went from managing a business to really just totally focused on my health. And it was dire enough at the time that I wasn't sure if I was even going to live to see Christmas that year. So it was a radical shift in perspective. I certainly got some very deep insights. There was a lot of regret that came up, things that I wish that I'd done with my life. And fortunately, this story went in a very positive direction. And this is me reenacting call from the surgeon later that year, and he just called me to say, we've done this surgery and we can't find any trace of the cancer anymore, and basically just go on and live your life. So it was a very pivotal moment in my life, and I just felt this deep motivation to do the things that maybe I'd regretted not doing in the past, and also to take the insights that I gained going through this experience. And one of the things that I took a close look at as I was going through the treatments was David Allen's Getting Things Done methodology. And I hadn't read the book before then, but this was a good opportunity to kind of do some reading when I felt up to it. And I didn't quite see how this would apply to me in my current circumstances because I wasn't working at the time, but I decided to kick the tires on all of this and created my first project around healing from the cancer. And so that was a well-defined objective. I put a time frame of December on it. And it just worked beautifully, and it really was a big part of the motivation to heal, and just really having a sense of something beyond my circumstances around health. And I wrote up the account of my journey and how I'd used GTD and sent that to the David Allen Company, and they were very happy to put this up on the GTD Times blog. And I got emails from, I think, about half the company, including David Allen himself, and was later interviewed on his In Conversation series. So that got me kind of thinking about, okay, where maybe there's some interest in doing something and then really focused on the productivity space. A short time later, I also started to use OmniFocus regularly, and I looked everywhere for help on getting started with OmniFocus and using it effectively, and I didn't actually find it, so I decided to create my own course, and I hosted that here in Vancouver and invited the Omni group to, I just basically told them about it to begin with, and then there was a lot of interest. They even sent a couple of people up from Seattle, and they filmed the course and did customer stories on me, and that again just really expanded my kind of sphere of influence, and all of a sudden I started to get calls from people all over the world saying, will you help me with my setup as well? So I've continued to do that work and just really enjoy the variety of people that I've worked with all over the planet. I was also invited to talk at the OmniFocus setup. I was there with people like Merlin Mann and David Sparks, and this is an event in San Francisco a couple of years ago now, and again got a lot of great connected with some great people through that. And then as I kind of started to work with this more and more, and it wasn't something I really planned out, it's something that's really kind of evolved, and I needed a kind of a name to call all of this, and I've come up with the term holistic productivity, and in just a moment I'll start to talk about what this actually means and how it applies in a practical level. And I also realized I couldn't work one-on-one with everyone in the world that was using OmniFocus, so that led me to develop Learn OmniFocus, which is a site that I launched almost a year ago now. And it's really taking the wisdom from my own use of OmniFocus, as well as the many people I've worked with over the years, and packaging it in such a way that I can share it. And I've also, one of the major motivations was to build a community around this app, because I realize there are a lot of people who have similar challenges and great insights to share and things like that. So that's become a global community that's formed over the past year. So that gets us to the focus of our webinar today, and that's holistic productivity. So we'll start by looking at it at a very sort of high level, looking at the basic concepts, and then we'll start to dig into some of the methodologies. And definitely keeping a sort of one of my eyes on the chat box. So as we go through, if there's something that's not clear or something you want to share, definitely feel free to chime in. All right, so first of all, let's define this word productivity, because this is a word that's thrown around all the time. I'm sure it's a multi-billion-dollar industry by now. So it's important to define it in the context of what we'll be talking about here today. And very basically, the definition I like the best is productivity is just about producing results, and it can be in any area of your life. So it's a very creative process. It's taking something that doesn't exist and bringing it into existence. So that could be maybe just writing a report, or answering an RFP or those sort of business type things we tend to do. It could be something that involves a team of people, something you couldn't do by yourself. You really need different people with different expertise. So it could definitely be a team project. And this third one's very popular. A day on the beach could be highly productive as well if you want to produce feelings of relaxation, maybe a suntan as well. So it's very open-ended. It's as David Allen says, make it up and make it happen. And the productivity is that process of bringing those things to fruition. And then the holistic side of things comes from noticing that as humans, we've got many different facets, and sometimes people talk about home life and work life and personal life and all this, but my approach around this is there's really just life, and it has all these different components, and none of these exists in isolation to the other ones. And I've also noticed that a positive shift that's created in any area of life will impact all other areas, at least to some degree, and that the area that really seems to need the attention is not necessarily the one to put your primary focus. So a classic example is someone might be having some performance issues at work. Maybe they're not meeting their deadlines, or maybe they're not even motivated to go into work in the first place. So they could focus on work and maybe make some improvements there, but that's only going to take them so far. But they maybe might choose to focus on another area. Maybe they're not sleeping very well at night or not getting very much exercise. So they could bring some focus to the health side of things. And let's say they're going from 4 hours of sleep a night to a good solid 7 or 8 hours. Maybe they're much more motivated when they go into work in the morning. They have a lot more energy, and the end result might be that they complete as much in 2 hours that they used to complete in an entire day. So it's really an opportunity to look strategically at all these different components and just look as where is the energy best spent, where is the time best spent. And we'll go through some specific ways of addressing this as we go through the webinar this morning. And so the basic premise of holistic productivity is that shift happens. That's S-H-I-F-T, and F is very important in there. And for it to be something that could be practiced, I've built it on these 4 pillars. These are the 4 practices, 4 components of holistic productivity. So we'll go through each of these, and if you have the workbook handy, you can open that up. We'll be going to page 2 in just a moment. And if you don't have the workbook handy, just make sure you have a piece of paper to write on or a text editor open or something like that. Okay, great. So I'll just go through the 4 pillars just to give a summary, and then we'll delve into some detail on each of them. So the first is around inner reflection. So the need to hit the pause button regularly to reflect on our life and our work. If we're too much in the sort of busyness of life, then we might actually be spending time doing things that aren't really producing the results that we want to produce, or we might not even be clear on what results we're after. And then there's acceptance, or there's a yoga term called santosha. And it's basically if we're not accepting life, we're resisting life. And that takes a lot of energy and it's not very productive. So that's something we'll look at in a moment. And then focus is just observing that it tends to be most efficient to focus on one or a few areas rather than trying to create change in too many areas all at once. And then inspired action is coming from a place of inspiration and not saying, okay, my life is only going to be better when I get this new job or this new car or whatever it is. Being able to tap into that inspiration in the moment, regardless of what circumstances are present. All right, so let's start with pillar 1. This is where we'll use the first exercise in the workbook on page 2. And this first pillar was really inspired by this statement from a couple of psychologists at Harvard University, which is rather blunt, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. And they said, we're already the most over-informed, under-reflective people in the history of civilization. Over-informed, under-reflective people in the history of civilization. We have so much that's competing for our attention, whether it's adverts or text messages or whatever is coming at us, and so much media that's there to be consumed that we sometimes lose touch with that inner space. What's important to us? What are our aspirations and so forth? So this first pillar is all about making time for that, and I find that's time that's very well spent. So this is a tool we use in coaching a lot called the Wheel of Life. And what we'll do now is just you'll have the opportunity to just take a moment to do kind of a snapshot of what your life looks like today. So the idea is we'll go through each of these areas and rate it from a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 would be, I'm just not satisfied, this area is not working for me right now. A 10 would be, this is off the charts amazing, I can't believe how incredible this is. And then a 5 would be maybe something you're kind of tolerating, it could be better, it could be worse, it's fine, that sort of thing. And we could certainly go into detail in each of these areas, but we'll just do a bit of a sort of a higher level perspective for now. And if any of these labels don't fit, definitely feel free to substitute in your own labels. These are just some fairly typical ones that apply to I'd say to most people. So let's start with the first one. So starting with career or life work. So just in general, how satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 10 with your career or the work that you're doing at the moment, or if you're in school, maybe it's the direction that your education is taking you towards this career. And I don't recommend thinking about this too much. Just take whatever number that pops into your head at first, and that's probably the most accurate one. And the next would be money, finances. So how satisfied are you with your financial situation? Are you worried about paying bills, or do you feel like there's a sense of abundance, or is it kind of somewhere in between? And then health, and that can be all aspects of health, but just overall, how satisfied are you with your current state of health? Is that really working for you, or is there some work to be done there? And then generally relationships in your life, friends and family, how well is that working for you? Do you have good connection with these people? Do you have a good community of friends and so forth? Or is there some sort of lack of satisfaction around that? And then in the area of significant other romance, is this working well, or is there sort of lack of satisfaction? And sometimes when people aren't in a relationship, they're tempted to put a 0 down for this, but you could not be in a relationship and still be really satisfied with this area of your life at the moment. So that could still be at a 10. And then personal growth. So this is basically how satisfied are you with your current opportunities to learn and grow. Certainly doing this webinar is an opportunity for growth, but just how much sort of energy maybe is going into that at the moment. And the area that sometimes gets forgotten in the busyness of life, how much fun is life overall? And how much time you're setting aside for recreation, things like that. And the last one usually needs a little bit of explaining: physical environment. And this is everything from how satisfied are you with the home that you live in and your workspace, and the city, the country that you live in. Just how satisfied are you with your environment overall? This one tends to score a little lower here in Vancouver when it's raining, but we got a nice sunny day here today. So I put this at about a 9 or so for myself. So just taking stock of that. If you do have it printed out, you can even color in the lines to get a sense of what this looks like as a wheel. And it's important to notice that this isn't necessarily like what's wrong that needs to be fixed. It's more just getting a state of, how well is life working in these different areas. And you could do this same exercise tomorrow, or even an hour from now, or next week, and get quite different numbers. So this is really just a snapshot of where things are in this moment. All right. I'm curious, did anybody get all 10s on here? No. Okay. If you got all 10s, you can probably skip the rest of the webinar. You probably don't need this. Any questions on this process, on the or any insights that came up as you were going through this? You can just type in the chat box if you like. And we'll move on to the second pillar, which, as I mentioned earlier, is acceptance. And if you have the workbook handy, you can shift over to page 3. And the basic idea is here, it's quite simple. If you're not accepting life as it is, then there's resistance. And resistance takes energy and disconnects us from life. So if you're not accepting life exactly as it is in this moment, then there's a sense of resistance. And acceptance doesn't mean that you're being complacent and saying, well, I can't pay my bills when there's nothing I can do about it. It's just kind of saying, okay, this is how much money I have in this moment, or this is the way my health is in this moment, or this is the way my job is going in this moment in time. And it's saying, okay, I'm going to accept that so that I'm not spending a lot of time worrying about it and complaining about it and things like that, because those sort of things actually, ironically, tend to keep us stuck in those things that we don't want in our life. So acceptance is a solid foundation to build on. And this is something I definitely practiced as I was going through my cancer treatments. And I certainly didn't accept that I had cancer 24/7 when I was going through that healing process. But those moments where I could say, okay, this is just the way things are today, that's where I found this energy started to be freed up that I could use for healing. And there's something to build on. So you might be familiar with Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, and it amazes me how statements made many hundreds of years ago are so valid today. And he says, be content with what you have, rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there's nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So lots of wisdom in that statement. So just take a moment now to, if you go over to page 3 in the workbook, or if you have, again, just a piece of paper to write on or something, just look back at the numbers that you put down for those different areas in the wheel of life. And again, without thinking about it too much, without overthinking it, just note, what is it you're resisting? What are some things maybe you tend to complain about? What are some things that you're sort of constantly sort of dwelling on that are getting your attention, but without there being anything productive that comes out of that? So just take a moment or so to do that. And if you wanted to type in the chat box anything that's shown up out of doing this, it's always interesting to see what other people have written. And you can just type it very generally. You don't have to get into personal details. And even as you're noting anything down, notice if there's any judgment that comes around it, and not making yourself wrong for resisting that, even if you've been resisting it for years. And part of this is just part of like hitting the pause button, and is noticing those things that are maybe kind of running on autopilot in a way that's holding you back, and starting to bring them into an awareness. Yeah, so there's one changing work, so I'm doing something I actually love. Yeah. And sometimes we get stuck in life is kind of fine, it could be better, it could be worse. It's sort of working at one level, so there might be a resistance to even changing anything beyond our current circumstances, because it steps into that space of being uncomfortable and uncertainty and so forth. But those are really places that we need to go in order to expand and grow and all those things. So if you're making a move and there's some discomfort involved, then that's definitely a good sign. Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next one, which is focus. And I think there's a great quote by Steve Jobs that I think sums this third pillar up very nicely. And he says, that's been one of my mantras: focus and simplicity. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple, but it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains. And I think that's almost human nature, where there's sometimes a tendency to make life needlessly complicated, because the complexity is something that we can hide behind. Whereas once things are really simple and exposed, then the path forward might be very clear, and there might be some discomfort involved in that. It might be venturing into some new territory. So just take a moment, maybe go back to the wheel of life, or just anything that kind of pops into your mind at this moment, and choose something you'd like that would be worth your while to focus in on, and getting fairly specific. So rather than just saying your career, maybe what's an aspect of your career, or what's an aspect of your work. So it could be as practical as you're getting your email inbox under control. Maybe there's a hobby that you'd like to focus on, or an interest that hasn't been getting much attention. Maybe it's a relationship in your life that could be, maybe it's working well and you just want to take it to the next level, or maybe it's not working well and it's being source of distraction. Maybe it's an aspect of your health. But just choosing something specific where, yeah, I kind of have this intuitive sense that if you were to create a shift in that area, then that shift would be felt across other different areas of life. All right, so that brings us to inspired action. And this is a moment where we can actually step into the time machine. You might recognize this as the DeLorean from Back to the Future. And when I first started doing this work and leading courses and workshops and so forth, I found I was kind of doing things in a traditional way where people would say, this is what I'm going to do over the next few months, and these are the objectives I want to achieve and so forth. But I found something that's useful in its own sense, but something that takes us to the next level is to actually go beyond sort of the mechanics of it and step forward into the future and just get a sense of what it would actually feel like to be in that place. So if you have a focus, if you've chosen a focus, and even if you're not sure it's kind of the best one to be working on, just using that for now and just to have something tangible to work with. And just imagine what it would be like to create a shift in that area in your life. So if it's health, and imagine what it would be like to maybe be sleeping well at night and what that would feel like without worrying about how am I actually going to get there. Or what would it be like to have your email inbox with no more than 25 messages at a time? Or what would it be like if that relationship in your life were really working, or that you had that job that you wanted, and so forth. So just, you can even close your eyes if you like, and just imagine stepping forward. I find 90 days is a good time frame to work with. And so just imagining it's 90 days from now, and without having to know exactly how you got there, something has shifted in your life, and just get a sense of what that feels like. Maybe even just notice what the emotional state is. Are you maybe feeling energized, relaxed, and excited? Maybe there's a sense of calmness that's come over. And just notice what's possible from that point, having reached that, having created that shift, what becomes possible if you were going into work full of energy, or if you were had a relationship that worked, or if you're not spending hours staring at your email inbox and feeling bad about that. Just notice what that would make possible. And if you don't get the chance to completely sort of explore this today as we go through this, definitely encourage you to maybe take some time later today and just explore that. And this is really tapping into something as children we tend to be very good at, and that's using our imaginations. And as adults, we sometimes get stuck up in considerations and, oh, that's not really possible, or how's that going to happen, or that's too much work. And so I think it's a very good muscle to work if it hasn't, if it's kind of atrophied over the years, is that imagination and just being able to take us to a place and just seeing what it would be like to be there. So it's really about inhabiting this future perspective, to just really get, is there something attractive? When I was reinventing Technically Simple, I did this exercise where I imagined going exactly on the path that I'd been on, and having it be successful beyond kind of the reasonable. And I actually wasn't that inspired by it, so that's what caused me to say, okay, I'm gonna recreate things. I'm gonna wipe the slate clean and engage in something that's really, really inspiring to me. And then the next, if you go over to page 4, there's a place to capture the inspiration. So if you imagine going forward in time, and it's a place to just note any feelings that were present or possibilities. And then a key part of this as we come back to the present is, from that place of inspiration, what's a discrete action you could take today that would move you towards that? And this is the reason I present in this way, is to make a clear distinction between this notion of being and doing. And it's kind of, I think, a fairly typical way to go through life is, what do I need to do to have something in order to be a certain way? So what we're doing here is tuning into more of that being, of that thing that you already have in that imagined space. And that tends to lead to more inspired actions. If you get in touch with what's possible, then you're probably going to be much more inspired to take action than if it seems like happiness is off in the future, months or even years from now. And the interesting thing is that coming from that place of being ultimately allows you to have things in your life. So things still get created, but it's created in that space of inspiration where you can actually be today the way that you would be being if that thing were actually created. We can tap into those emotions anytime. So the essence of the holistic productivity is this is a structured approach to help you get your shift together. So something that gives you a framework for creating these shifts. And I just want to spend a little time talking about the online course that I developed around this. And what I've just presented is all taken right from the course. And we had a relatively short time to go through it today, but we go into it in much more depth in the course. And these courses are conducted in a small group. So there's a maximum of 10 people in each of these courses. And collectively, these are called a productivity pod. So it's a group of people you get to know quite well, typically as you go through the course, and it could be people in many different countries and time zones and professions and things like that. And I find that's kind of part of the magic of this is being able to connect with these people that you probably wouldn't have met otherwise. They might be in a totally different part of the world too. And a key part of this is having it be interactive. And you maybe had a little taste of the interaction before we got started today, but it's a big part of the course. And that's one of the reasons I chose the Zoom solution. I find it's currently the best one out there to video conference people together, and having that video in addition to the audio and so forth, I really find helps to create that human connection. And it's really been interesting to see the friendships and things that have formed out of people doing the course together. I also want to make this very practical, so not just have it be only about self-discovery, but also bring a really practical element to it. And I realized that I couldn't really effectively create a course that dealt with Mac and Windows and Android and iOS because there's just so many different tools out there. So I decided to keep this course focused on Mac and iOS, which is what I primarily use myself. I also wanted to make sure this course had a lasting impact, so it wasn't just something where you participate in it and then go back to the way things were. It's really about establishing new habits and patterns and so forth. So part of this is to have a 90-day process as part of the course. And this is where you actually take one area, or sometimes people will work with 2 or 3 specific areas, maybe one personal, one work. And then they actually, similar to what we did today, they'll define the objectives and step into the future and just kind of feel what that would be like to create that shift. And then working with a partner from the course, as well as having the support of the group, embark on this 90-day process. So practically speaking, there are a total of 6 sessions. And the first one is really focused in on these first 2 pillars around inner reflection and acceptance. And we put the Mac and iOS tools to good use, and there's some specific ones that I focus on as we go through the course. And one in session 1 that we focus on is Day 1, which is, I think, the nicest journaling app that I've ever seen. It's just a beautifully crafted app, and you can use it on iOS as well as Mac, and they all sync together. And this is really the app that got me into journaling. And I find journaling is a really powerful tool as part of the self-reflection process. So it's a tangible thing that we can do each day to really emphasize that inner reflection. Developing habits is a big part of the course and of productivity in general. A lot of it comes down to habits. So if you're practicing like GTD, for instance, it's not so much learning all of the principles. It's really about putting them into practice. And I found this tool for the iPhone. It's called Habit List. Works really well in that regard. It's a great way to not just to articulate the habits, but to kind of see how you're doing over time. And it'll even remind you if you haven't completed a specific habit by a specific time. So we get into that. And then in session 2, the emphasis is on the Getting Things Done methodology, and David Allen's given me permission to provide an introduction as part of the course. And some people that come into the course are brand new to GTD. Other ones are black belts and have been practicing it for years. And I find wherever you are in the process, there's an opportunity to revisit, to fine tune, and so forth. I'm actually a black belt in karate as well, but I still constantly go back to the basics and just do those little refinements. So this session is intended both for the beginners and the seasoned practitioners. And something we do as part of this is delve into mind mapping. I find it can be very effective to mind map out the areas of focus and accountability in GTD terms. And if you've seen some of the content on Learn OmniFocus, then you've probably had a taste of this already. And I find MindNode is one of the best tools out there for iPhone and iPad to actually physically do the mind mapping. Drafts is another great tool that we talk a lot about Capture in session 2. And I find this a great tool for iPhone and iPad just to get into that habit of capture without worrying about what to do with the things that you're capturing right away. And that's just a shot of what it looks like. And then going on to session 3, this is where we take all the insights and the theory and we really apply them. And OmniFocus is a major focus in this. Everyone who's in the course has access to Learn OmniFocus, so I don't go into every detail on the app, but it's more about looking at the sort of strategy for setting it up and using it in a way that we can discuss it as a group and look at different workflows and so forth. And then Evernote is also, I think pretty much everyone who does the course is using Evernote, at least to some extent. So we look at how Evernote and OmniFocus interacts and best practices for using and organizing an Evernote database. And then we also look at the calendar, and this is an area that sometimes there's a bit of confusion about what goes in OmniFocus versus what goes in the calendar. So we go through some strategies for using the calendar as a way of also making sure that different areas of life are getting the appropriate amount of attention. Then in session 4, we continue on that practical route as well as introduce the 90-day process. So this is the very first day of the 90-day process. And people get to share what they're up to and get some feedback from the group and so forth. And then once the 90-day process, often people start out really inspired and motivated and ready to go. But as the Robbie Burns said, the 18th century poet, and I'll try to do my best Scottish accent, he said, "The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after glee." That's probably a pretty bad Scottish accent. But I did have someone from Edinburgh in one of my classes, and he read this out. I should put a little sound clip of that maybe and drop it in. But the idea is that sometimes we set off with the best of intentions, and then life shows up and circumstances, and we kind of go off the path and maybe even forget about it, what it was that we were up to. So part of it is to make sure that we have structure within the course to keep things moving forward. So in session 5, we're at the halfway point, and this is an opportunity to touch base and acknowledge what's working and some of the hurdles that have been overcome in the first half of the process, and also acknowledge what's getting in the way. What are some habits or some life circumstances and things? And there's some great sharing in this session, great insights from people in the group. I always learn a lot in this session as well. And then at the very end, we do another group session at the 90-day mark, and we look at what are some learnings from this. So it's not just about what is accomplished during the 90 days, but it's really an opportunity to develop some insights and to see what works and what doesn't work, and apply that learning to things in the future in other areas of life. So if you're interested in registering, as I mentioned, there's 6 sessions. So there's over 8 hours of online interactive content. And then there's manuals for the first 4 sessions that cover a lot of the content, kind of a much expanded version of the PDF that you downloaded. And then the first 3 ones have workbooks to help you integrate what you're learning, the exercises that you do between the sessions. And then once we get to session 3, the idea is to be using the tools like OmniFocus and Evernote in place of the workbook. Learn OmniFocus is included as part of the course, and if you're already a Learn OmniFocus member, as I know a number of you are, then you'll get a discount on the course. And then the specific sessions, the next pod is Pod M we're up to now, and that'll be starting on June 4th, which is at starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time, so that'll be 1 o'clock Eastern time, and 6 o'clock in the UK. It'll be 7 o'clock in like Paris and Madrid. And so this one, these morning classes here in Pacific time, I find very popular across North America and Europe. I've had someone from South Africa who's participated and so forth. So tend to have a really, really great mix. And then the first 4 sessions are in consecutive weeks. And then we have the session 5 and 6 at the 45 and 90-day mark. And if you would like to read more and to register, you can go to technicallysimple.com/HP for holistic productivity. And full cost is $4.99 for the course. And there is tax if you're living here in Canada. And if you register by Sunday, that'll make the price $50 less, so it'll be $4.49. And then if you're also a Learn OmniFocus member, just send me an email and I'll give you a coupon code that'll drop it down to $3.99. If there aren't any further questions, we'll call it complete for today. And definitely feel free to drop me an email if questions come up after today. And I want to thank you all for joining, whether you've been joining through the live webinar, or whether you're watching a recording of this. And I hope this was useful. And I hope to see you maybe on Learn OmniFocus, or maybe even in the Holistic Productivity course. Okay, well, thanks very much, and best wishes from Vancouver. Take care.